Call to order a public hearing on the proposed property tax levy. Please call the roll.
Mayor Coos.
Here.
Mr. Fritzen.
Here.
Mr. Preston is not here. Mr. McBride.
Here.
Mrs. Lorenz.
Here.
Mr. McCarthy.
Here.
Ms. Gaines.
Here.
Is anyone here wishing to speak on the proposed property tax levy? In fact, we'll make it less formal. Could you raise your hands if you intend to speak so I can just kind of judge? Okay, thank you. Whatever order you want to come. Who wants to go first? Sure. Again, name and address for the record, and we'd like you to hold your comments to about the 3-minute time frame.
My name is Doug Fansler. I live at 307 Carriage Hills Road. We're preparing to raise our property taxes, so there must be a shortfall. Could it be from planning on abating real estate taxes and future grants that we're planning to give to Rivian? Could it be from the $8,700 employee holiday luncheon that's on the budget for approval tonight? Could it be from the $12,000 from the for tree grates and frames that's being approved tonight? Could it be from the $4,000 for conference expenses being approved tonight, most of which were for Mr. Coos? Could it be from the $3,000 for Chamber of Conference dues and gala that's going to be approved tonight? I want to know who is negotiating the deals on our end. Rivian appears to have received everything they asked for. Do we ever say no? No security, no mowing, no snow removal? Maybe those would have helped in our planning for not having to raise our real estate taxes. Is the same negotiator the one who gave Portillo's developers a sales tax abatement when Champaign did not even get asked for one, according to their staff? Do we ever say no? Raising our sales tax last year and abating sales tax to Portillo's needlessly is a travesty. Raising our real estate tax now and preparing to give an abatement to Rivian is a travesty. The fake news is in the Panagraph today, actually. The title of their headline said that we're saving $2.2 million, where the true thing is that that should have been reported on is that we're raising our real estate taxes. I would like to know, is the 45-day waiting period being removed, or are you trying to see if it is legal so you can keep it in place, even though it's truly limiting speech by all of our citizens when they can only speak in 7 of the 24 meetings? We need to remove that now. How many council votes are unanimous? What purpose do you guys serve if you always say yes to whatever's being proposed by the city or by Mr. Coos? Some dissent is needed to keep this council from looking like they have some purpose. Rivian, now that we know, is planning to make electric and autonomous cars to some degree. They're doing what exactly 33 other companies are listed as doing. Many of those companies like Ford, Audi, Mercedes, and most other major brands are doing exactly the same thing. I wish them success now that they're going to potentially come here if they decide that. They have a very tough road to hoe in order to have that have a success there. Thank you.
Since I have to ask it 3 times, I'll do it. Anyone else wishing to speak regarding the property tax levy?
Good evening. My name is Craig Stimpert. I live at 5 Crestwood Court in Normal. I am opposed to the property tax increase that is before the council tonight. In the past, I've listened to council members flippantly compare a tax increase to an extra Diet Coke a week. It is not. This type of reasoning is blind to the heavy tax burden homeowners are paying prior to any increase. The current sales tax rate in Normal is higher than 92% of other communities in Illinois. As for our high property taxes, I'd like to give you 2 real-life illustrations tonight that I've come in contact with this month alone. My brother-in-law owns a business here in Normal, and he's offered a job to someone in a different state who is hesitant to move to Normal because if he does, his property tax will be 4 times the rate that he's currently paying in another state. I also know a couple who moved here in May from another state, and they are renting their home right now. They have no intention of buying a home because they will tell you straight up, our taxes are too high. Now, you as council members are familiar with these scenarios. 2 weeks ago, you approved $1.8 million in tax relief for Portillo's, and last week you offered tax relief to Rivian Motors. I have a much smaller request tonight. Would you give property owners in Normal the same types of tax relief that you do for the Hyatt or Marriott Corporation, Tartan Realty Group, Portillo's, or now Rivian Motors? Homeowners deserve tax relief just as much as they do, and we're asking for it as well. Now, no doubt you will counter that this increase is a last resort and Springfield is to blame for our pension problems. And of course, we'll all hear tonight how much you hate to raise taxes as you vote to raise my taxes. How come we don't see this same consternation when it comes to wasteful spending patterns of this council? The reality is this council's prioritization of budgeting for our pensions is the equivalent of a consumer who blows his monthly budget on a flat-screen TV and doesn't have enough left over to pay his mortgage. The only difference is that consumer does not have the luxury of forcing taxpayers to bail him out, as you do. I'd ask you tonight to consider homeowners in this town who are hurting. And I think of my neighbors to the north of me and the south of me who are still unemployed from the Mitsubishi closure. Recently, the Midwest Food Bank moved to Normal, to a new warehouse vacated by a distributor for Mitsubishi. And as much as I support the mission of the Midwest Food Bank and the fine work they do in our community, their expansion only highlights the increased number of people who are hurting in our community and need tax relief. Given these realities, how can we possibly consider another tax increase? I encourage council to consider ways to cut spending, tighten your belt, give property owners the relief they need and deserve, and fully fund our pensions. Thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Mark Turatilli. I live at 1212 Timber Ridge Court here in Normal. Thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight. I thank the gentleman who spoke previously to me for highlighting some of the points that have been kind of in the news lately. And it is a concern of voters when we raise taxes $6 million in 1 year, and we talk about we want to fund our pensions, and I don't think anybody in here is saying that we shouldn't be funding our pensions. And we all understand that the states are making us do this. And again, as I mentioned a few weeks ago, I applaud the town of Normal for actually being ahead of most other communities in meeting those obligations. But we're told that we don't have the money in the general fund, and that it has to come from property tax because that's the most stable and reliable resource. And that if we do the money out of the general fund, we lose programs and services. But as the gentleman before me have pointed out, there's a lot that is not programs and services that has been dished out as a result of our last tax increase. So it does seem hard to swallow when we have another $500,000 that we're asked for on property taxes. And then when we look at the property taxes, the most stable and precious resource, now that's being given away too. So I understand that it's all about economic development, that we have obligations to this fund, but the obligations are going to get even tighter. By 2040, we're supposed to close this gap that we have. And I echo some of the sentiments that more needs to be done in terms of tightening the belt and adjusting the priorities. Because despite all of these things, which are designed to drive the economy, all these handouts, giveaways, subsidies, incentives, whatever you want to call them, the fact of the matter is that our pension funds are increasing in their liability and are currently between IMRF, police, fire, and post-retirement health care benefits. We have an unfunded liability of over $100 million on the books. This little property tax increase is not going to cover it. It's in your documents. On top of that, we have $100 million roughly in bond obligations from all the stuff that's been going on. Add to the interest on those payments, the long view that we're supposed to be taking by 2040 results in $250 million of money that has to be paid out on top of our operating expenses. That's already on the shoulders of the taxpayers. This is not going to come from a small increase in property taxes. This is not going to come from some increased economic activity out at the Mitsubishi plant. This is going to come from a reprioritization of what we do as a town and how we attack these huge, huge deficits and unfunded liabilities. Those numbers are in your own documentation. I encourage you to look at them. Please, please, let's find some ways to get this spending under control. Thank you for your time tonight.
Is there anyone else wishing to speak regarding the proposed property tax levy? Hearing none. Motion for adjournment?
So moved.
And we have a second from Mr. McCarthy. Please call the roll.
Mr. Fritzen?
Aye.
Mr. Preston?
Aye.
Mr. McBride?
Aye.
Ms. Lorenz?
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Ms. Gaines?
Aye.
Mayor Kus?
Aye. Call to order a regular meeting for the Normal Town Council for December 19th, 2016. Please call the roll.
Mayor Kus?
Here.
Mr. Fritzen?
Here.
Mr. Preston?
Here.
Mr. McBride?
Here.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Here.
Mr. McCarthy?
Here.
Ms. Gaines?
Here.
We'll begin with a pledge of allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Our first item of business is the omnibus vote agenda. These are items that are considered routine in nature and will be handled with one vote by this body unless a council member would like to pull an item for discussion. I would like to be excused on voting on any bills I may have incurred in my duties as mayor. Ms. Lorenz?
I would like to pull item E.
E is in Edward.
Yes.
Thank you.
Move approval.
You.
Second.
I'd like to pull F.
Oops.
Oops.
We have a motion and a second. Items that we are considering in the omnibus vote are approval of the minutes of the regular meeting of December 5th, 2016, and approval of the minutes of the special meeting of December 12th, 2016. Approval of town and normal expenditures for payment as of December 14th, 2016. A motion extending participation in the Diabetes Disease Management Program for 1 year. A motion to authorize an amendment to the fiscal year 2016-2017 Social Security budget for the general fund. A resolution accepting a dedication of right-of-way from Country Acres Land Corporation for the Greenbrier Drive extension and Hershey Road improvements. And a resolution accepting dedication of right-of-way from IDEV LLC for the improvement of Hershey Road from Shepherd Road to Rab Road. Please call the roll.
Mr. Fritzen?
Aye.
Mr. Preston?
Aye.
Mr. McBride?
Aye.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Ms. Gaines?
Aye.
Mayor Kus?
Aye. The two items, we'll start with item E, a resolution approving a project change order from George Gildner Incorporated in the amount of $142,421.20 for College Avenue Railroad Water Main Encasement Crossing Project and approval of a budget adjustment from the Water Reserve Fund account of $135,321.20. And I will point out, this didn't make it to the packet, which is the actual resolution. The staff report is in your packet, so it's the resolution's in front of you now. Ms. Lawrence?
Yes. I'd like to move on this resolution.
Second.
My question really is about the cost overrun, and if either staff or either Mr. Peterson or staff here who are present could speak to that. And is it just sometimes one of these things that can't be anticipated, and just a little bit of background before we just let this one go,
When the when the plans were prepared for this project, we shared them with Union Pacific Railroad, given that the work is in the railroad right-of-way, and we obviously have to have them review the plans to make sure that we have accurately reflected the project, and in this case, that any and all necessary safety precautions are included in the plans and specifications. In this case, they approved the plans that were drafted. We bid the project, awarded a contract to Gildner. Gildner, during the course of the project, during the course of the project, there was a change made in the alignment of the rail line. That was something that, of course, we knew about and anticipated in the plans. But because of that change, a railroad inspector who was on site indicated that in order for not only protection of the rail line but protection of employees, some shoring had to be installed that wasn't called out in the plans. There was quite a bit of discussion, as you can imagine, about that, given the significance of the change order. It was submitted to the railroad for review, and they did acknowledge, yes, the shoring was required, even though they did not call that on the original plan. So that necessitated additional services. The contractor then hired a third party to perform that shoring at an additional cost. And since it was our contract, we were obligated to pick up the difference. So, yeah, it was frustrating,
Okay.
to put it mildly.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, we're kind of left holding the bag because this wasn't called out. The railroad would say, well, had we called it out, you would have had to pay for it anyway in the project. But we all know usually these things on the back end are more expensive than they are on the front end if it's part of a competitive bid situation. Unfortunately, we just didn't have that opportunity because Gildner already was awarded the contract.
Okay, okay.
So
So a little bit
unfortunately, there's
of
not much we can do.
oversight on the railroad's part.
Yeah, we're frustrated. There were a lot of discussion at staff level about this, very frustrated, but I think we're at this point.
And
we
I don't
are
see what
obligated.
we can do, we're kind of, the
Yeah.
ship has sailed to some extent,
Right.
so, but I wanted to call it out just
Yeah,
as
thank you.
a point of frustration too, I guess, shared frustration.
Correct.
Thank you.
Further discussion on this item?
Just a follow-up question on that, because, I mean, it does feel a little bit, and I'm sure you feel this way and staff feels this way, like you're aiming at a moving target. I mean, and it puts the contractor in a difficult position because they're on site, they have to do the work. We have a contract with the contractor to pay them for the work. But is there any concern that this might happen again down the road? I mean, and we have no remedy.
Really, we don't. We don't have a remedy. The railroad forced the contractor to put in the shoring. Yeah, we don't have much of a remedy. Obviously, we'll ask these questions in the future, but we thought there was a thorough review of the plans by the railroad, and apparently whoever reviewed the plans did not anticipate the need for this additional precautionary measure, which is a very expensive one.
All right.
Further?
Yep.
Please call the roll.
Mr. Preston?
Aye.
Mr. McBride?
Aye.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Ms. Gaines?
Aye.
Mr. Fritzen?
Aye.
Mayor Kus?
Aye, the resolution is approved. Item F is a resolution to appropriate $50,000 of the town's allotment of motor fuel tax funds for a tree removal contract for the improvement of Greenbrier Drive from approximately 900 feet north of Shepherd Road to Hershey Road and of Hershey Road from Shepherd Road to Rab Road.
Move approval.
Thank you.
Second.
Ms. Gaines?
I just guess I wanted to pull this because this is one of these kinds of items that, when we're talking about taxes and all of that, that things come up that are so unexpected that who would have thunk it, that, where we're needing to remove these trees, that they're this cover and a habitat site for endangered or threatened Indiana and northern long-eared bats. Who would think that? How do you plan ahead for that? But it's one of those things that come up. So sometimes it's really hard because you're looking at that, okay, oh geez, what do we do? Well, we don't really have too much of a choice in that either. because there are laws that say endangered species have to be taken care of. And so I guess I'm just throwing that out there just because we need to do it. I've never seen a long-eared bat. I've had about 3 bats in my house, but I didn't notice the ears in the past. But it's just a matter of, fortunately, I suspect we have the motor fuel tax to pay for that. But
We had, the actual allocation is actually for the tree removal, but we had to verify, which we did, that this little collection of trees is not a habitat for these species. And we go through this due diligence for almost every major construction project where federal dollars are used. We're required to do all sorts of environmental analysis and look for, also, groundwater impacts and other species that we have to protect. So in this case, we did find that the bats in question were not threatened, so we have to remove the trees to make way for the road. But you wouldn't. Most people don't think that you've got to worry about some bats, but we do. We have to worry about them. The fact that they're endangered is probably why you haven't seen many around your neighborhood.
That's a good point.
I don't know.
Further on this item? Please call the roll.
Mr. McBride?
Aye.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Ms. Gaines?
Aye.
Mr. Fritzen?
Aye.
Mr. Preston?
Aye.
Mayor Kus?
Aye. The resolution is approved. That concludes our omnibus agenda. We have 3 items of general orders tonight. The first is an ordinance authorizing the 2016 property tax levy. Motion for approval?
Move approval. Second.
Second.
Is there discussion on this?
I always feel like whenever we have some discussion started at the outset through the public discussion, that perhaps we should pick up at that point and respond in some ways. A couple of notes, I guess, that I took as our speakers were highlighting some important issues. I wrote myself a question, what are our alternatives to this? And I think we've gone around that block. But for the sake of the question, are there alternatives to this tonight? And I don't think there are, but maybe for the sake of the discussion and the issues raised, we ought to answer that once again.
The alternatives, as I see them, is leave the pension funding as it is, which is problematic because we are required to comply with the recommendations of our actuaries, but we could just leave it as is and say we don't have the money.
Right.
Reappropriate other dollars from the general fund to pay, that would be alternative 2.
Right.
Reappropriate other dollars from the general fund, therefore make some cuts or somewhere in the general fund and reappropriate dollars to the pension fund, so we're complying with our funding requirements, yet we're doing them with other sources of funds. And the third one be to find revenue elsewhere through some other tax increase or some other source of funds. So raise revenue some other way, cut the budget elsewhere, reduce services or reduce something, and divert it into pension funding, which is where all this money is going.
Right.
There's a modest amount for the $130,000 for the library. The rest are going to pension-related, retirement-related expenses, or just leave them as they are.
Right. I mean, none of these choices are really very good. I mean, nobody likes any of the choices, I suppose. And so I guess that's the point that I would want to share with our speakers tonight, is that it's the best of some bad choices, and we have to go with a reliable source of funding, that being the property tax. And as if I recall correctly, the amount of dollars that we're talking about would be a significant impact on other revenue sources. Am I correct? I mean, if we were to go and like you said, alternative 2 of the general fund, it would be a significant impact of cuts and so forth in order to divert them to the pension. Is that correct?
Well, the two pension funds alone, you're talking about close to 500,000 for police and fire pension.
Right.
So that's the additional amount, so you have to find,
A $500,000
you know,
somewhere.
$500,000 in general fund, and, you know, you could find it. You'd have to cut some things or reduce some services or something of that nature.
And it would be significant. I mean,
Absolutely,
It would
yeah.
be at the bone services and
Well, you know, with any cut comes sacrifices.
Right.
So it's either reducing services or you really can't do it through capital projects because that's a one-time cut. And if you're going to, this isn't every year. You can't.
Right.
You know, we've got this 500,000. You got to fund the same 500,000 next year. So
Right.
it's not something you can divert capital projects for 1 year. So it needs to be a permanent cut. So that usually comes out of some operational account. So it's services. So it's staff, or you pull back on some service level, you know, something of that nature. But yeah, with a $500,000 cut in the general fund, yeah, it's not easy.
that would be felt.
Yeah.
Quite a bit, right. So I just wanted to raise that point. The points are well taken. They are ones that we've thought about and have discussed, and staff, I'm sure, has put many, many hours into this, and it's not easy, and it's no good choice here.
Mr. Fritzen?
Just a couple of points, and Mr. Peterson touched on one there in his last couple of sentences. But several years ago, when our cash reserves and our general fund cash reserves balance dropped dramatically during the recession, we examined different ways to restore those reserves. And it was, as Mr. Peterson described, a laundry list of programs, services, and staffing that we would have to make adjustments to. And fortunately, we didn't have to go very deep with those as we looked at them. But there were some cuts made. But when you say reduce services, that probably means jobs.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't just mean the service isn't going to be performed. The service isn't going to be performed. The expense behind the service, the biggest expense behind the service is personnel. And so we're, that's a management administrative decision, and we back that in policy votes through budget considerations and the like. But that's not something you want to undertake cavalierly. That's something that has to come with some deep consideration. And so I think we have to keep that in mind. Some of the things we are funding. We talked about this recently when we talked about this levy earlier, and tonight's really the formal adoption of it. But we've had some discussion about it, and we're protective of other revenue sources because of we rely on them for a lot of our operate. That's how we operate. And the other thing is that in a public hearing setting, typically you're not going to have a half a dozen people show up to encourage you to raise their taxes. So we had some speakers tonight, and I agree with Ms. Lorenz that they had some good points and they're well taken. And I think in our budgeting process, a lot of those things are considered by staff before it ever gets to us, and then we have the opportunity to weed through that as well. But last week when we had the special meeting, there were many speakers here in favor of doing property tax relief for the opportunity to do economic development. And yeah, that's an answer people expected to hear tonight, but that's the reality of the times we're in. And we received several emails as well from people who weren't able to attend that night that said, yes, do this, even though they know that the result could be this kind of action here. But again, the long-term health of the community is the thing that we have to look at and hold in balance. And if you look at the pie chart, our percentage of that property tax bill the property taxes are higher in our community than other communities, but our community is a community, of choice by a lot of people. Some choose not to live in Illinois because of the tax situation, but some people do choose to live in Normal because of what these taxes do. And the school district obviously is the biggest recipient of it, and our school district stands up well in comparison to others, and we have an outstanding school district. We've got a great community college here that the community college is becoming more and more important all the time in our education system, and higher education system. So there's a big chunk for the community college, and so the county provides services. We don't see that or feel that as much within the city limits, but that's another big chunk of it. So our portion of that tax bill that has been described as being so high, what we do there, and we do cautiously and always have, and all the time I've been here, we've always been very cautious in the levy, and of course the rate will be set once the assessments are completed. But because we recognize these other taxing entities don't have some of the revenue sources we have, and so we're cautious with that. So yeah, it's an increase. Any increase is felt by the people paying them, which includes probably most everyone here tonight. And so we're not flippant, I don't believe, in that, and never have been. And but we choose to fund the pension obligations from these funds for a reason, and we protect other revenue sources because of the operations needs that we have there. Like I said, I didn't expect anybody to come out here tonight and say, "Go for it, guys." But I think there are a lot of people in the community who are appreciative of how we balance the usage of our revenues. We don't sell any products. All our revenues come from fees and taxes. We understand that. But I think we keep that in pretty good balance, and we have a few years ago, like I said, we did have to go through a belt tightening, and it can be done to some degree, but the big ticket items pretty much are going to be big ticket items, and the kind of adjustments we can make, we were able to get that cash reserve built back up, but the across the board significant cuts that might be desired by some aren't desired by all. That's for sure in our community.
Mr. McCarthy and then Ms. Gaines.
Thank you, Mayor. I want to start off by thanking the speakers coming and being willing to pose questions for us to have discussions to help understand the thinking. I think it's an important part of the process, and so I thank you for that. One of you, and I apologize, I don't remember which one, posed that you would likely hear that these are difficult decisions. I think, like, more broadly, our job is a difficult one for the perspective that we must balance investments and cost control. I mean, that's essentially when you think about what we're doing on the financial side of this job, is we've got an asset called a community, and we have to put some kind of investment into it to make sure that that asset doesn't decline and people don't want to be here anymore, thus reducing revenue. But we also have to be good stewards of taxpayer dollars and try to be efficient with those and control those costs where we can. That's the difficulty of it. All of that, the entirety of that, is the difficult job that we're faced with, I think, up here. And so specifically to a few things it said, so if we look to our investments in our community that hopefully will continue to provide good revenue streams so we can do good things in the community, or serve to limit those investments in the futures that might grow jobs, the things that actually provide additional revenue or grow jobs, so the residents of Normal can have an income and shop in our shops and provide those shop owners with jobs, and the cycle of economic development continues. I think that's a dangerous approach, is that if we continue to cost cut on our investments, eventually we will have a dilapidated asset that does not produce what we needed to produce in revenue. So that's a tough one when we start talking about incentives. I think that the couple of incentives that were mentioned, it's important to point out as a kind of a point of order, those incentives are being generated by the projects themselves, and that they aren't current to this budget cycle. So what I mean by that is that those projects either generating the revenue that pay for the incentive, or that they're generating jobs, and they're generating jobs, and the project must perform in order for them to, in fact, get those incentives, and that those incentives aren't for several budget cycles, so they don't have an impact right now. The last thing I want to talk about was from a conversation over the weekend I had with a normal resident about property taxes and kind of overall. And one of the statements at the end of that conversation with that normal resident was, the statement made to me was, it's easy to forget, I guess, now that having talked through it, to forget that costs always go up. Now, tonight we're talking about pension costs going up, and those are beyond our control. You've heard that from the speakers, the Illinois General Assembly. But it's not just that. When we talk about an overall budget, just a broader umbrella, that costs do go up. Every year, operating the town of Normal costs more money than it did before. It's not due to a budget shortfall. It's due to plain and simple math that the costs go up. And I think that's, again, part of the pressure that we're under here, is that we have to manage that, and sometimes that means we have to raise expenses, or raise fees. Thank you.
Ms. Gaines?
I echo that it's good to hear people talk about the concerns and what money is being spent on, and I appreciate that. And one of the reasons I appreciate it is it's being said out loud here in a meeting. We spend an awfully lot of time of looking at our costs. We spend a lot of time getting all kinds of information to help us formulate a lot of these ideas. We meet in January at our budget session, and we spend a very long time going through the whole budget and where that money is needed. Many of my colleagues said many of the things I'm thinking as well, but I hope people understand that this is not a flippant choice. We do this based on facts and figures, and we do know the facts and figures. We do look at the numbers, and as Mr. McCarthy said, costs do go up. People get raises. Fuel costs more. You may have, I don't know, there's just a ton of things that go up. We also do, and I want to point this out because one of the speakers spoke about this. Yes, we do some things for our staff. We want to reward good staff with good things. And in the long run, trying to be penny wise can often end up being pound foolish when it comes to saying, oh, we need to do away with some of these things, because I think there's very few people in Normal, at least they haven't contacted me. I get an awful lot of contacts with kudos about the staff and all the things that are happening and the good services that they get. And I want to, that's a shout out to the staff. We have an excellent staff. And that's one of the reasons that makes it easier to look at this and say, we have to do these things because the town of Normal is a quality of life community. There's no question about it. We do, there's a lot of meetings with people outside, and when you're looking at the here and now, and all you're taking care of is the here and now, those communities are ready to crash and burn. There's an awful lot of communities that don't know how they're going to pay their next garbage pickup. They don't have money to deal with roads. They don't have money for this. This council and the council preceding everyone else here on the council, we have chosen to look at the long term. we've chosen to try to make certain that we cause Normal to be a place that people want to be, people want to shop at, companies want to come in and invest in. Because if we didn't have some of these companies coming in, if we didn't have shop owners, if we didn't have the small businesses, if we didn't have all of these things, and we only relied on property tax, you can bet our property tax would be, I don't know, I'm guessing 10 times more than it is, at least, and that's probably being pretty generous. I was friends, very dear friend of mine, was the mayor many years ago, when Normal was kind of still that small little suburb of Bloomington. Had really no business base, had, it was all property tax. And most of that property tax was simply residential property tax. And so I've had tons of discussions with her over the years about how it was so difficult to get anything done for Normal because of that. But we persevered. We are not just that little suburb anymore. We're a thriving city that people in other places are jealous of, to be quite frank. 7 other communities our size in central Illinois have higher property taxes than we do. And I think part of that is because they probably haven't done the foresight as well as the town has. So, thank you for letting me spout off about that. This is, it's important though. The town is an amazing community. It's amazing. And I'm really proud to be a citizen. Thank you.
Mr. McBride?
Thank you. Probably a few things. I want to try to get everything in here. First of all, to kind of follow what Ms. Gaines had to say about us being a quality of life community. I mean, I think we can all agree that people aren't coming here or staying here because of the beautiful weather, particularly this time of year. People aren't coming here and staying here because the state of Illinois is in such splendid financial condition. I think they're coming here because our community provides opportunity and an outstanding quality of life. I would like to thank all 3 gentlemen for speaking tonight. Again, I know what it's like to come up and speak in a situation like this. First of all, it's not easy, but clearly you wouldn't be taking the time out of your Monday evening to do it if you didn't care about your community. And we appreciate the fact that you care about your community. Obviously, I think you would agree we all care about our community too. That's why we're here. Nobody wants to sound flippant about an issue like this, but I also think that I'll just avoid it altogether because nobody really wants to hear how hard the decision is for us. I mean, nobody wants to hear that. I mean, we signed up for this. That's what we're supposed to do. I'll just add that, we pay those taxes too. I do want to address a couple of tropes that seem to float around when you say 92% of communities in Illinois have lower taxes. I don't that could be true. That I don't know, but I will say my first question is I'd love to see a list of those communities and then see a list of what services are being provided. The town historically has worked very hard to compare itself with those communities, comparable communities in central Illinois. What makes them comparable? Location makes them comparable, similar weather conditions, for instance, but also scale. They're similar size. And I would put our services, when you layer in the value for the buck, I would put our services, be those provided by the town of Normal, those provided by Unit 5, those provided by Heartland Community College, I would put those up against any of those competing or similar sized communities. And that's just a fact. And we fare very well in comparison to those communities when it comes to rates. So I would just ask everyone to apply a little bit of perspective and a little extra layer of context when we talk about these situations. Thank you.
Mr. Preston?
I too would like to thank Mr. Fansler, Mr. Skimpert, and Mr. Tiratelli for coming and speaking your mind tonight. I want go a little different direction with my thoughts on this conversation. You know, we've talked about quality of life. We've talked about how we all value, being a great community to live in, to raise a family in, to work in, and the like. And, I want to look at this from a slightly different angle, I guess. So, within our property tax levy in the town of Normal, the amount of that goes to the general fund, that 1.6 million, is between 10 and 15% of the town's levy of your larger property tax bill. And that exact dollar figure is the same as it was last year, and has, unless I'm mistaken, is the same or lower as it has been for the last 10 fiscal years. And as we're talking about, quality of life and how the town, makes investments and the like, I want to make sure it's understood that the general fund operations are not increasing with this tax levy. I mean, it's pretty clear that the largest contributor to that is our pension system. The Illinois General Assembly mandates that all municipalities fund their pensions at a rate of 90% funded by the year 2040. A number of years ago, this council, as a history reminder, decided that it was prudent and responsible with the people's money to, rather than looking out to the year 2040 and try and be 90% funded at that point, that as long as we are willing to do so, looking at the overall financial picture of the town of Normal, that it would be wise of us to lay the foundation now to instead be closer to 100% funded by that time. And I think personally, being responsible, planning ahead, in that case, I think is the fiscally conservative thing to do, rather than letting our pension costs continue to rise, be mandated by the Illinois General Assembly to fund them at a certain level and then not be prepared so down the road because we didn't start that process and weren't as serious about contributing to it from the beginning. So from that standpoint, for me, the property tax levy is not about town investments or incentives or anything else. It's about our pensions, about what we're obligated to do, and about how we've wanted to approach that obligation and be as fiscally responsible as possible with it. Thank you.
Thank you, Council. There's not a lot I can add. I will say that I do very much agree with everything that you said tonight, and I will echo the sentiment, I think, here that this council is an incredibly professional, dedicated, and responsible group of people who make very hard decisions and have to balance different things to get the community to the point where they think it should be. They are thoughtful. They spend time on this. And so I thank you for all the effort that you put into this, the work of making these tough decisions for the $4,200 a year you get, right? Further on this item? Please call the roll.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Ms. Gaines?
Aye.
Mr. Fritzen?
Aye.
Mr. Preston?
Aye.
Mr. McBride?
Aye.
Mayor Kus?
Aye. The ordinance is approved. Item 7 is ordinances authorizing the abatement of 2016 property taxes for debt service. Motion for approval.
Move approval.
Second.
As these mostly have to do with our general obligation bond issues, because they are GO bonds, we're required to pledge property tax if we are not able to meet the debt service. And so consequently, every year when we do meet the debt service, which we've done handily ever since we issued these bonds, that we authorize an abatement of the property taxes that would go to the debt service. Correct. Comments or questions?
For some people who might not exactly understand what that means, you're abating it to, where are you abating it to, and what does that actually mean?
Well, to your question, an abatement is saying that we are not using property tax dollars to cover the debt service of these bonds, because we have identified and used other sources of revenue to do that. GO bonds are on the good faith and credit of the community that issues them. They're responsible to pay them regardless. So if such time we could not pay it, we would have to pay it out of property tax. But again, we've never been faced with that. We were always in a comfortable position to fund our debt service. And as Mr. McCarthy pointed out, most of the sources of the funds for those debt services come from the projects that we underwrote with the bonds.
Just to add one point, abatement, you might say forgiveness, we forgive it, or we're not going to collect it from you. We're going to levy, but we're really not going to collect it, so you don't have to pay it. And the mayor's right, we are obligated by our bond agreements, we're obligated to levy the tax, but we are not obligated to collect it as long as we have other sources for the payment of bonds.
Ms. Lorenz?
Well, and I would just add to this line of discussion that, you know, kind of, again, to put it in household terms, it's, you know, in essence, we're covering our mortgage, if you will, out of our checkbook. We're not having to dip into a savings account somewhere. And so, to the point, I think, Mr. McCarthy, that you made, that, you know, while we invest in our asset, we do so in a way that is at a pace and a level of responsibility that we're able to cover the obligations that we have out there, the debt that we incur. And I think that is important for members of our community to understand. And I do try to provide that piece of education that, you know, yes, we do have debt, without a shadow of a doubt. But are we able to manage it and pay for it responsibly, like in your household, like being able to write it out of the checkbook and not have to dip into, you know, the family savings or trust fund or something? You know, we are responsible, and I think that's important to understand, and that's what this abatement is all about.
Go ahead, Mr. Britson.
I think one thing that's reflected here that, you know, it's not in the report, whatever, but I think what this is a reflection of is what we've been talking about, and that is the well-managed operation that is the town of Normal. You know, quite a bit of the debt here went into Uptown Normal, and you know, we've used tax increment financing and the like to help pay the way for Uptown Normal, but the bills are being paid through other sources. These are the other sources. The development that's happening has generated additional funds that have come in property tax or sales tax and the like that enable us to abate these costs. I think that's, you know, the ability to do this is really proof that our approach to things works and has been working. You know, could that change? Yeah, it could change. I mean, but it's one reason we're diligent in looking at sales tax in particular. You know, it's one reason to do a Portillo's development. It's a reason to you know, have a special service area like the shops at College Hills and you know, to invest in these things. And again, as Mr. McCarthy pointed out, these are self-generating revenues that get plowed back into the development, that once those agreements expire, 100% of that money is going to come to us. And we don't know what, right now, what a development like Portillo's might do around Portillo's for future development. We've talked about that. So, but those are very calculated, very conservative enticements that are offered. They're done to enable us to do this type of thing and to leverage this kind of money. If we weren't doing those things, we wouldn't have issued these bonds. I guarantee you that. We wouldn't have issued these kinds of bonds if we have to rely on property tax to pay them, but we wouldn't have the things that these bonds have paid for either. And that is our infrastructure being, you know, infrastructure is kind of a, you know, gets thrown around, you know, national elections, state elections, and the whatever, but, you know, there are sewers and water lines and things of that nature underneath the streets, and there are the streets and the sales tax we talked about before. We're plowing more money into concrete streets in this coming, you know, budget, without making a long-term commitment to that, because, you know, we had other things that we intended that tax for that haven't come to fruition yet. So we're being cautious year to year to take a look at what's the best use of those funds. But you know, that infrastructure stuff is really important. And it's not just something to throw out as a campaign promise. It's something that you do year in and year out to not put yourself in a position where you have huge problems to deal with. And that's where Normal stands. And it's the kind of thing that doesn't get a lot of publicity and the like, but, you know, it's the kind of thing that I think people have to understand that those are protections that have been put in place through being wise in the financial management of the community and having some of the diversity in how we do things, not just constantly looking for drawbacks and places where we can save money. Sure, there are places we can save money. Programs come and programs go. The administration has recently changed our structure in Parks and Recreation, I think, to make it more efficient going forward with the fine arts aspect of things, the theater, separating it from some of the parks operations. These are operational things that are designed not just to shift things around and change responsibilities, but to make it a more efficient operation. And more efficiency is more cost effective typically. And so those things are happening all the time. They don't get a lot of fanfare, but infrastructure, the administration and watching our operations day to day, these are investments that are made, and they're made, like I said before, I think conservatively and wisely, and they enable us to abate. I mean, add them up. I didn't add them all up, but there's 10 abatement resolutions here. It adds up to a lot of money that normally would have to be paid out of our property tax revenue. Like I said, if we weren't doing all these other things, we probably wouldn't have done any of these things, and we would be the lesser for it.
Thank you. Mr. McCarthy?
I just want to follow up on my counterpart, Mr. Fritzen's last comments is to say when we're looking at evaluating a community's financial health, the ability to do this is a sign of the financial health of a community. We don't have to look too far to the north to understand that there's a very large community that is having to raise money to pay their bond obligations off rather than because those projects are generating revenue. So if you're perusing through our budget and our financial health, this is one of those good signs that says that we're doing pretty well.
Thank you. Further on this item? Please call the roll.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Ms. Gaines?
Aye.
Mr. Fritzen?
Aye.
Mr. Preston?
Aye.
Mr. McBride?
Aye.
Mrs. Lawrence? Mayor Kus?
Aye. The abatements are approved. Item 8 is an ordinance providing for the issuance of an amount not to exceed $23,500,000 in general obligation refunding bonds, Series 2017A and B, to be used to refund the town's Series 2007 fixed-rate bond issue.
Move approval.
Thank you. And again, this is a refinancing of a bond issue which will save the town in the neighborhood of $2.2 million by taking advantage of the current interest rates. Discussion on this item? Please call the roll.
Ms. Gaines?
Aye.
Mr. Fritzen?
Aye.
Mr. Preston?
Aye.
Mr. McBride?
Aye.
Mrs. Lawrence?
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Mayor Kus?
Aye.
Mayor, could I make a quick comment?
Certainly.
Ordinarily, item like this comes before you. Todd Kriskowski would be here. You all know Todd with Mesro Financial. He's been our financial advisor for a number of years. Unfortunately, Todd's mother passed away over the weekend, so he was not able to be here, and our thoughts certainly go out to Todd and his family. I do want to point, Dan Barlow is here. Dan is Todd's colleague at Mesro Financial, and we're glad he's here just in case you had questions. And, of course, Andrew was prepared as well. But we appreciate this. We plan to go to market sometime in the first quarter of 2017, try to find the sweet spot in the interest rate environment. Unfortunately, the rates have gone the wrong direction the past couple of months, but we hope they stabilize in the new year and maybe improve a little bit. So we're keeping our fingers crossed. Maybe our savings will be even a little bit more than the $2.25 million that Andrew mentioned in his report. We'll keep you posted on how that works out. Thank you.
Great. We have no new business. Before taking a motion for adjournment, are there comments or concerns? Mr. McCarthy?
As this is our last council meeting before the Christmas holiday, I just want to say to all staff and residents of the town of Normal, happy holidays, and be careful when you're out there keeping our streets safe and clean for us. Thanks very much.
I was going to direct this to Mr. McBride. This 92%, somebody mentioned, I've heard this before, that the sales tax rate in Normal is higher than 92% of all other communities. And I don't know whether that's accurate, but it might be. Consider this. There are 1,299 municipal governments in Illinois. Let's see, I have the numbers here. 960 of them are less than 5,000. 632 are less than 1,000 people, okay? There are 90 that are over 25,000. Those are home rule municipalities, and they are permitted by the Illinois Constitution to have a local sales tax. Many of them do, not all of them, but many of them do. In Normal's category, 50,000 and over, there are 29 cities. So you're comparing 29 larger full-service cities to a total of 1,299, and it is certainly possible, since most of those are very, very tiny, provide very limited services, and they don't even have the ability to levy a sales tax, that it is very possible that our sales tax rate is higher than 92%. I think if you look at the at the 90 communities that are able to levy a home rule sales tax, I think you'll find that ours is probably about in the middle of that group. So it's a little deceptive when people throw out that 92%. There's lots and lots of very tiny municipal corporations in Illinois. And the other thing, I can't help myself, Mayor, but to clear up this, we continue to hear people talk about the fact that Portillo's got no incentives in Champaign. And unfortunately, local media ran a story about that before all the facts were apparent, and they contacted us for a comment once they heard this information at Champaign. And of course, at that point, we didn't know the details, but we said it is very likely the reason why there was not an incentive package needed for Portillo's in Champaign is because we suspect the site costs are dramatically lower. As you will recall, the reason that the Portillo's here required some public assistance was because of the extraordinary costs to purchase the site and tear it down. None of the rebate dollars is going to Portillo's. It's going to the developer. Well, sure enough, the facts are in, and the Portillo's project, the site costs in the Portillo's project in Champaign are roughly 60% lower than the site costs here. They wouldn't have qualified for an incentive here either with those kinds of numbers. Again, in Champaign, they're buying a vacant restaurant, roughly 9,000 square feet, 9,300 square feet that I understand has been stripped, all the value taken out of it, on a site that's an acre and a half. In Normal, by contrast, they're purchasing a functioning hotel that was not up for sale, 3 stories, 49,000 square feet on a 2.5 acre site. It's a much more expensive site, and the demolition costs will be substantially more expensive to tear down a 3-story hotel compared to a single-story restaurant of the 9,300 square feet is much less. So I think publicly we just need to acknowledge that they are 2 different projects. They both ultimately will end up with a Portillo's restaurant that'll look about the same, and the cost of the restaurant will be about the same in both communities. It was the site costs that drove the need for public assistance here in Normal, and people keep throwing that out as an example. I just want to make sure the facts are out there now that we have them.
Well, and to tag on to that, Mr. Peterson, the site location was a rather small circle, were they not? I mean, Portillo's came to town and said, we would like to be, and they kind of pointed to a spot. So we didn't have a lot to work with. We didn't have many alternatives. And I think that's something else that I try to bring about in some of my educational comments as well.
And they pursued multiple locations. Within that small area.
Right, but it's not
and
like
they
we
could
could
not
look at
find
Main
anything
Street
cheaper
or other parts of town. They were wanting Veterans Parkway, and in fact, even a particular intersection of Veterans Parkway.
And where they're going in Champaign on Prospect is analogous to our Veterans Parkway. It is the place where, kind of the hub of retail. If you've been out in Prospect Avenue, where it's right in the middle of everything, and I can understand why they'd want to locate there. But it's a smaller site. It was for sale. It was a distressed property, essentially abandoned, and they were able to buy it. Still expensive, in my opinion, because it's in a great location, but not nearly as expensive as the site here, because it was not a income-producing property that they were buying. It was essentially a broken-down building that had been stripped.
Good.
Thank you.
Any other comments or concerns? Motion for adjournment, please.
So moved. Second.
Call the roll.
Mr. Fritzen?
Aye.
Mr. Preston?
Aye.
Mr. McBride?
Aye.
Mrs. Lorenz? Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Ms. Gaines?
Aye.
Mayor Kus?
Aye. We are adjourned. Thank you.